and it's in the breaking we come unbound. And it's in the giving we are found. Yeah, you could barely change.
Welcome to A Medicinal Mind, Wisdom and Wellbeing, a podcast dedicated to the telling of authentic stories and the sharing of insightful wisdom, exploring science and spirituality, medicine and Mother Nature. No topic is off limits when it comes to growing our personal understanding and supporting our collective well-being. With your host, Dr. Rob Abbott, a family medicine resident practicing spiritually focused and evolutionarily informed functional medicine, we hope to nourish your being so that you can flourish in whatever the moment has called for you to do.
And I know you try.
In episode 39 of A Medicinal Mind, Wisdom and Wellbeing, I seek to dispel some of the myths behind mental health with naturopathic doctor, Dr. Christina Bjorndal. As you will hear in the podcast, Dr. Bjorndal's journey to becoming a holistic mental health clinician is anything but linear or easy. In this conversation, Dr. Bjorndal and I share some intimate details about her own struggle with mental illness, navigating the medical system, stigma, and labels that sought to suppress her flourishing. Growing through these incredible experiences, Dr. Bjorndal offers some of her own insightful wisdom as she realized the power of nutrition, connection, and emotional freedom to cultivate whole being wellness. She leads us through her own definition of health and walks us through her clinical approach to addressing mental illness, offering powerful physiologic and psychological therapies to bring about positive changes to an otherwise conflicted mind, body, and spirit. Dr. Bjorndal and I even dig into some potentially controversial topics, exploring the victim mentality and what it means to contribute meaningfully to society. We even start to ask the question, what thoughts and beliefs are actually behind our most common habits and perceptions? Dr. Bjorndal's story and clinical work is beyond inspiring and will certainly empower anyone who has experienced mental illness. I personally resonated with one of her most poignant pieces of wisdom. You will be with you longer than anyone else, so why not start focusing on the relationship with yourself first? I hope you resonate with her authentic story and seek out some of her nourishing resources created to support people through their journeys of healing. And with that, let's dig into the show. Well, Chris, thank you so much for making some time to talk with me. I know we were doing a little back and forth to finally get a time nailed down, and I'm just really lucky and grateful to have you here today. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you. It's great that we could connect.
I was joking even before we started. I feel like I'm doing the Canadian tour right now. The last couple of podcasts I've done have been with some Canadians, and I'm increasing my world reach. So thank you for joining me and helping me in that endeavor.
That's right. So now you're international, crossing borders.
International. But I wanted to give you some time here at the beginning. I know you've done a number of podcasts. It's actually one of the ways that I found out about your work was our kind of good mutual friend Guillermo Ruiz had you on a great show on his podcast, and I've heard your story, which just really resonates in my heart. And hopefully you're not too bored of sharing it, because I would love to hear as much of that story, going back even as far into your childhood to see the real roots behind, how you found your calling now.
Yes. It's it's actually not a story that I'm bored of sharing, because I think it's so important and it's got so many different angles that people can resonate with. But I opened my discussion in the book Beyond the Label that I've written about this how the neurological and emotional imprinting that can happen in utero. And when people ask me, when did your mental health struggles begin? I now say actually in utero, because I'm adopted. And I open the discussion of my book with a conversation from with research that I learned through a doctor named Dr. Gabor Mate, who talks about this imprinting that can happen when you're in utero. And in particular, if the mother is extremely stressed, as can be in the case of adoption, that imprinting can affect the child and actually set them up. His research is mostly in addiction, and it can actually set them up for a predilection for addiction. So it's really interesting. So when I came into the world, I was quite a sensitive baby, but for the most part, my childhood was fairly standard. We were talking earlier before we started the recording about protecting our children from trauma. And the only real thing that happened, I think, to me in childhood, other than this sort of imprinting, was always very sensitive. And I learned that I was adopted when I was in grade, I think it was grade 1, might have been kindergarten. But there was a conversation going on then. There was a video I think they showed about animals being born, and that got me thinking, well, where did I come from? And so when my parents, told me that I was adopted, I processed that to mean that I was with them temporarily, that somebody else was going to come and get me at some point. So I waited and waited, but nobody ever came. And it made me, so what happened was I developed some core beliefs at that time that I wasn't wanted and that I wasn't lovable. And that served me to operate in the world in a certain way, which turned me into an overachiever, kind of trying to keep my place, so to earn my keep, so to speak, so that I wouldn't be sent back. And eventually, when I must have been 12 when I turned to my mom and I said, "Is anybody coming?" And she's like, "What are you talking about?"
What are you talking about?
Yeah. And then we had this conversation about that. And so she was devastated. But anyways, so the only thing that really happened in childhood was I moved, in grade 3, and these girls set up an I Hate Christina club in grade 3. And so that was hard for me. That really upset me a lot. But anyways, you get over these things and you move on in life. And then got to grade 10. And then a friend of mine had an eating disorder. And she made an innocent remark to me about, maybe I should, when I questioned her about what she was doing, she had bulimia. I questioned her about it. I'd never experienced that and didn't really know anything about that behavior. And, teenage girls. So I was quite impressionable and easily influenced. And so I started doing that. And then, but the interesting thing as a side note that's important to mention is the year prior to that, I did antibiotics for acne.
Oh,
so
yes. Yeah.
yeah. And when I was researching my book, I made this connection. I really hadn't made the connection between the gut biome and mental health until then. And really, I don't think, that's new research. That wasn't available in the 80s. I don't think in 1980, anybody was talking about that relationship between the gut biome and mental health. So it just highlights the importance of taking a case. And I continued my overachieving behaviors into university. And then I ended up experiencing depression and anxiety. But again, at that time, I didn't know what I was experiencing because I didn't have the language or the words or the understanding or experience to know that that's what that was. And it was only by the grace of God, really, that my best friend ended up going to the UBC Student Services and seeking help for me because she was so concerned.
Oh,
And the
wow.
and the recommendation that she was given was to make an appointment for me, which was a big risk that she took because I think, it's not always well received when people are not feeling well, perhaps because you don't, people don't really like having pointed out to them that they're not doing very well, right?
Yeah.
Or it's like commenting on somebody's skin, oh, maybe you should go, whatever. So anyway, I was willing, I had an indifferent willingness. So I did attend the appointment she set up for me with the psychiatrist, and I started an antidepressant, and within 3 months, I had a week with no sleep and had a full-on delusional psychotic manic episode. And it took 2 police officers, two paramedics, my mom and my boyfriend at the time, to wrestle me into a straitjacket. And off I went to the hospital, where I was left in a rubber room and injected with haloperidol, which is a powerful antipsychotic, to come back down to reality. And when I came out of that, I was then, when I was transferred to the psych ward, I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1. And I was sent home and didn't really understand any of it, to tell you the truth. I didn't, because again, I'm adopted, so we didn't have this family history to go by. It was a very, it was a very scary experience, for not only for me, but also for my caregivers, my mom and my boyfriend at the time. And so it was quite traumatic, I have to say. But and all I did with that really was take the medication and stuff the diagnosis down and put it into a dark corner that I didn't want anyone to know about.
Yeah, that's very, very common. I mean, so many aspects of that story, I wish they weren't as common, or that we had a culture where we, sort of fed into the idea that we need to suppress all of that. I mean, it goes both ways in terms of the types of medical care that people are receiving in these states of tremendous vulnerability, and so just societally, relationally, how we view some of our friends and family members when they're going through crises, that creates this, sort of almost desire and need to kind of put these labels down because they're just so terrifying, and just don't know what they mean. And you put people on medications that alter states of consciousness and awareness and feeling. It's scary when you think about what our tools are in general and sort of neuropsychiatric care, and sort of hearing it play out, at least so far. And the story that you've shared is, I don't know, it's just it hits me hard anyway, to hear that. And I mean, we're so fortunate now to have you, I think, having gone through that experience, so you are trying to give other people a chance so they don't have to go through something similar, and you've really paved a new way. But was there anything in particular, like during that hospitalization, that period after, where was there like an epiphany moment or something that hit you and said, like, something is wrong here? Yes, they've told me things are wrong. They've given me these diagnoses, these labels, medicines, which I guess something must be wrong. But did something hit you in terms of an epiphany as to why?
Not at that point. But yes, there was a turning point where an epiphany came. But the sad thing is, it came after a suicide attempt that left me in a coma with kidney failure, on dialysis, being told I was going to need a kidney transplant. So that was the turning point for me, and that happened. So this first mania that I was mentioning was in 1987, and that suicide attempt was in 1994. So 7 years later. And now I'm working in the corporate world, and I just was wearing the mask, that everything's okay on the outside, but I was dying on the inside. And I didn't, again, I was high functioning in the sense that I would go to work and I would do well. Again, that overachieving behavior.
It drives things. Yeah.
Yeah. But then I would go home and, spend my weekends contemplating suicide. And then one day, I did execute, but didn't. Obviously, I'm still here. So the turning point, to answer your question, was there. And that same friend that made the appointment for me back in university, she gave me a book to read called Return to Love by Marianne Williamson. And in that book, there's a passage on surrender. And she talks about basically, surrender is a gentle melting into who we really are. And it's a letting go of our armor. And for me, what opened my eyes is that I didn't accept who I was. I was wearing this mask, this armor, to be able to muscle my way through the world. And also there was another discussion that I read, and I don't recall I thought it was in Return to Love, and I recently reread the book and it wasn't in there. So I'm not sure where I read this, but there was a group of a research project on two groups of AIDS two groups of AIDS patients. And the one group had love and support and by their family members and community, and the other group was shunned from their communities and families because they were homosexual. And they just studied the lifespan and prognosis of these two groups, and not surprisingly, the group that had the love and compassion did much better than the other group. And that's what dawned on me, that I was really no different than people who didn't accept themselves, and I didn't accept myself at all. So that was the turning point, because by all stretch, that suicide attempt, in my opinion, should have worked, and it didn't. And so, the question then came to me was, well, then what am I doing here? And what is the purpose of my life? And what is the point? And if I am going to be here, I do not want to continue like I have for the last 7 years, because it's been unbearable. And so then there's got to be other ways. And so that's when I started the inquiry into looking into alternative health. And because up until that point, it was just prescription after prescription after prescription, a little bit of counseling, but nothing much else. So nobody discussed diet. Nobody talked about really looking at my core beliefs, how I behaved in the world, my emotions. None of that was discussed. And nobody ever really asked me how I felt, about these labels. And it wasn't good. I didn't feel good about them.
Wow, it's so powerful to hear all of that story. I mean, I have a personal bias to sort of integrating that narrative and finding meaning in those relatively traumatic experiences, and these iterative periods of growth, and trying to integrate those things that we initially might want to shun away because they're just so horrible to think about, or we don't want them to be a part of our life. It's so hard to accept. And you described the armor, which I think is probably the best metaphor out there to really show how we go about trying to protect ourselves. The scary thing is, though, while armor can certainly keep some of the difficult and challenging things out, it also keeps love out. It doesn't discriminate. It's kind of like we say with antibiotics; they're going to kill the good with the bad. So the armor is going to keep the bad with the goods, and you don't get the choice. And the description of surrender as gentle melting, I just I love that too. Although I feel like some of the ways we attempt to surrender aren't as gentle or as seamless as melting. But if we can make it into a gentle melting and acceptance, I think it would be much more of a sort of nourishing experience, and what I think the word surrender and what the connotation of that word really means. And I'm just so thankful now that you're doing such pioneering work. I really feel strongly that some of the world's greatest healers go through these personal experiences to come to this realization, or come to a passion, a calling, to do greater service, that there's just no way it would have been possible without those experiences. And was curious if you wanted to shine a light on perhaps what you see. We've used a few terms here. We've talked about a lot about your sort of experience in mental health and in psychiatry and drugs, but you also talked about this aspect of emotions playing a role, and social support, and really just this broader picture of what health is. So I was curious if you could provide us with your definition of health and how it encompasses all of these aspects that you've been talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, health is all we've got, really. From the minute you're born, you're dying for the most part. So you've got it's not like we're cartons of milk and we come with expiry dates. I think life would be a lot nicer if we actually had an expiry date stamped on our wrist. So we would live our lives a lot differently if we knew when our time was up, but we don't know when our time is up. So what's going to extend your time is how you pay attention to your health. So this concept of health is a very subjective one, because it has so many different factors at play. And the thing is that I think with Western medicine, we've tried to make it very objective, that, okay, there's various parameters that you have to have your cholesterol under certain numbers and your hormones have to be in a certain range. But I think that's just taking it up to that one objective perspective, and it's much more than that. So what I talk about in terms of the areas that encompass health, and this, my book is Beyond the Label, 10 Steps to Improve Your Mental Health with Naturopathic Medicine, but really, these 10 steps are really for any form of health, in my opinion. It's not just for your mental health. So the 10 steps are Well, first I'll step back. I'll just explain that what you want to understand is there's four aspects to you as a person: the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And our Western system is focused on the physical. Again, those objective type measurements for the most part. And if we're going to talk about that, then we have to understand that there's three aspects to you as a person. There's the or three macro systems within you. There's your neurotransmitters, there's your neuroendocrine or hormonal system, and then there's your organs of detoxification. And all of these are interacting together within your body. There's not like there's separate departments that aren't talking to each other. Everything affects each other. So the way to support those macro systems, the foundation of health, in my opinion, is diet, sleep, exercise, and then managing stress. So that's really working on the physical level. And what people have to understand is that for every pharmaceutical, there is an equivalent nutraceutical or herbal medicine that could have very similar mechanisms of action. It's just that, for example, if we're going to use an antidepressant like Prozac or an SSRI medication, the amount of, for example, say St. John's wort that you're going to have to take to be the equivalent of 20 milligrams of Prozac is a lot. So the pharmaceuticals are very strong and can be quite powerful. And I'm not against them at all. I just think that my philosophy is minimum dose for maximum benefit. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for pharmaceuticals. So I wouldn't be alive if I didn't have those at some point in my life. However, I thrive in my life because of these 10 steps that I'm talking about. So the next steps are then getting into the mental, emotional, spiritual side a little bit more. So I look at people's thoughts, their emotions, how they behave and react in the world, the environment from three perspectives, this concept of the toxicity and the chemicals that are in the environment affecting our body's ability to function. This idea of genetics versus epigenetics. Again, remember, I'm adopted. So when I was told that this is a genetic condition and there's nothing that I can do about it except for take psychotropic meds for the rest of my life, I didn't accept that as an answer because I couldn't look to my left or right to verify the truth of that statement. And so I subscribe more to the theory of epigenetics, which is that genes load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. And the last concept around the environment is this idea of neuroplasticity, which is, if you want to learn more about that, there's a great book called The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Deutsch, who's a Canadian psychiatrist. Yeah.
It's a really great book.
And it talks about lots of health conditions where you can create new neural pathways. So you're not really, you're not fixed in any way. You can change. So it's really important. And then the last area of the last step in the 10 steps is love and compassion, and then wrapping that all up. Love, compassion, and spirituality, basically. And then, wrapping it all up in this concept of love for yourself and love for your friends and family and coworkers and the planet as well. So that's my concept of health. I mean, it's all those steps I think are extremely beneficial. It started for me with just looking into the diet.
Yeah.
Not even. It started with taking supplements. That's what it started with me. So yeah, so there you go. That's what I think people need to look at. And there's much, the thing is, how you feel in your body, but you don't know how good you can feel.
Oh yeah.
Right. So you get used to feeling a certain way and you think, hey, well, this is as good as it's going to get.
Yeah.
But then you make a change and it's like, oh, wow, I feel even better, and I actually feel the best now that I've ever felt. And I'm, and again, this concept of aging,
Oh yeah.
I mean, I just said a minute ago, you're dying the minute you're born. But the thing is, aging is a state of mind. And this whole concept of aging is another challenging thing to challenge, because people who are listening, I would ask you to think about what is your concept of aging. And if what comes to mind is, decline and decrepitness, then that's got to shift. I work with so many patients and you see people, and I try to guess people's age, before I look on the intake form. And, you meet people who are 70 who look like they're 90, and you meet people who are 70 who look like they're 50.
Oh yeah.
Why is that? Why is that?
Yeah, it's incredible. I've been kind of playing that game a little bit in the hospital setting. It's generally, people going the other direction. They're in their 60s and look like they're 80. And I sometimes I tell my parents who are just so active and mindful of their health, and I keep reminding myself they're in their upper 50s, and I see people their age who are just have so many chronic diseases, and it's like, whoa, that just smacks you in the face that there's something going on. It's not just a biologic process. But I love that those steps and the articulation of all those facets. It's something anyone in integrative sort of holistic health, we share and speak that similar language, and the beauty is how we are, you articulate it and put it into practice. And I think you've done both quite beautifully. You're a wonderful author and also a very practical, practicing clinician. And was curious if you wanted to sort of speak to either of those areas now, and how you maybe have implemented some of those steps into your work with patients, maybe even talking about an individual case if you or have the liberty to do so, or how that's sort of morphed into the way that you write and try to educate, because I think both are equally important and things that you've done quite well in your work so far.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's been, one of the things that I didn't do in my book, which I will have to do for the next one that I'm planning to write, is bring more case studies to the table, because there's been so many amazing success stories, and with some really difficult health conditions. Like there's one case that comes to mind. This patient, she was actually a nurse, and she had a car accident, and then shortly after her car accident, she experienced psychosis, and then she got diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder, and basically has been living, when she came to see me, had been basically living in her apartment on a disability for 20 years.
Oh, wow.
Had not left, basically just only in touch with her mom and dad and her 2 siblings. And we started, and I am, as I mentioned, I'm not anti-pharmaceuticals, mm-hmm. but what we put in place was we started with these 10 steps. So, and also at this time, she must have been, I've been seeing her, it's been almost a decade now. We started, and she was taking, I think, 4 or 5 psychotropic meds. So,
oh goodness,
yes, that's a real mixture. And I think what I want to mention about that is we study these medications in isolation in a trial perspective, but we don't study polypharmacy.
And most we study too.
That's right. Yeah, and if you do, but most people are on more than 2.
Yeah.
Right? So I think you're right. It's a real soup, and I think it's a shame to be on that many. But anyway, so now, after working with me for this length of time, she got a boyfriend. She's living with her boyfriend. She's volunteering at the hospital. She volunteers at the maternity ward. She is reduced her medication. She's now on 2 medications. She's lost weight. She's now thriving in her life. The next step for me, which I would love to see, is for her to actually go back to work.
Yeah.
And become a contributing member in that regard. Like I remember one thing I didn't mention is one of my doctors that ended up being one of my heroes is Dr. Abraham Hoffer, and he is a psychiatrist. He's passed away now, but he is the psychiatrist who was nutritionally oriented. Mm-hmm. So he started me on a supplement protocol. He worked with Linus Pauling, who won 2 Nobel Prizes in when he was alive. And Dr. Hoffer said to me when I went to see him, he asked me 2 questions. Well, more than 2 questions, but 2 questions that struck me as interesting that he asked me was, number 1, did I have a job? And number 2, did I pay income tax? And so that was really important to him, that people have a sense of fulfillment in their lives, that they're and working is, gives people a sense of contribution, and
Yeah.
they feel, and there's something to be said about this mentality of being on disability. And
Mm.
I don't mean this in a negative way. If somebody's listening and they are on disability, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that, um, I just think the energy is different if you're able to go out there to a job that you can enjoy and contribute and earn a paycheck, you know? So that was really important to Dr. Hoffer. And because a lot of mental health patients with schizophrenia, with bipolar disorder are not working, right? They are on disability. And so that was what he really wanted to do, is help people get back to the state of functioning in their lives where they're able to contribute more than.
I love how you said that, and because you sort of had a little segue of, well, the next thing I would like for her, and you could have inserted, any number of things. One of them could have been to be off the medication, but that's not what you're worried about. What you want for her is to have even more thriving and be even more functional in society and to contribute, and whatever that looks like, whether that's on certain supplements, a nutrient-dense food protocol, doing some kind of relaxation, and on a pharmaceutical or two, whatever that looks like, that doesn't really matter as long as the person feels fulfilled and as well. And I think I start to think about one of my own teachers and role models was telling me, it used to be commonplace in some of the psychiatric hospitals. And I know a facility near me in Virginia, where they basically it was almost like a small community, and everyone who was a patient had different tasks, and they kind of made a mini sort of faux economy. And one of the stories I heard anyway about this facility is that they eventually kind of shut that down because they started to compete with the locals, the local businesses, and because it was that functional and successful, and the things that they were making were it had a farm, and it was from what he told me quite amazing, and these people were happy, and some of them might have been on 3-4 medications, but they were giving back to each other and contributing. And the fact that we don't have more of that, or base our therapies on a degree of functionality, and sort of push more often than we should the disability. And I agree with you, it's a touchy subject, but the reality is, I think some of your most challenging patients, I know some of my most challenging patients have been ones who have been on disability and have just unconsciously ingrained this sense of entitlement's not the best term, but just
No,
it's
but
a loss of
it's a victim mentality.
Yeah, can you comment on that a little bit more? I feel like we should touch that. I mean, I know it's touchy, but I feel like you have some great insights.
Yeah, and I think the thing is, I think too, just to talk about, is that there's different ways to contribute. So, for example, for this patient that I mentioned, so she volunteers, right? She goes 3 hours, 3 times a week. For now, that's what she's capable of doing, and so that's awesome. That is a contribution, right? Doesn't mean you have to necessarily garner a paycheck, but you are not just sitting at home binge watching Netflix all day long, right? So you are contributing, and there's many ways to contribute. And so I think, though, but this victim mentality is, and this can come across, and this is what happens in mental illness, because you get told that you're not going to get better. You get told, like one of the chapters in my book could be a book, I think, in and of itself. It's the myths of mental illness was the chapter. And I believe I came up with 21 myths, or maybe that's 23. I'd have to look back here because it's been anyway, myth 20, I think it's 23. And these are all things, 23. These are all things that I was told that so, like, you'll never come off psychotropic meds. You should never have children. It's really hard to come off an antidepressant. You'll never be able to function without them. This is what you get told. So this feeds into this belief system that I'll never get off disability, right? And because you get told that. And I think what people have to understand is you have core beliefs. So this is from psychology, from cognitive behavioral therapy. You have core beliefs, and these can be positive, they can be somewhat negative. But the question you have to challenge them with is, are they even true? Are they even true? And then we have what's called shadow beliefs or unconscious commitments. This is our subconscious mind. So you have your conscious mind, so things that are in your conscious awareness, and then things that are in your subconscious mind. And it's really the subconscious beliefs that are driving the behavior. So think of the person who wants to lose 20 pounds, but never gets off the couch to go to the gym. So they know they want to lose the weight, they really do, but they sabotage themselves every step of the way. Mm-hmm. That's because there's a subconscious belief that's lurking in the dark, the deep recesses of our mind. I had these at play for me with respect to writing the book. So I was in the closet, so to speak, about bipolar disorder. Mm-hmm. I've just come out of the closet with the publication of this book. I've been dealing with this mental illness for 31 years. I'm 51. I've just come out saying, wow, hey, this is my label. I was out about anxiety and depression and the eating disorder, but never bipolar disorder because I didn't want anyone to know. Mm-hmm. Because it's such a deep, dark mark for me. It's not. I think now, having watched the conversation about mental illness over the last 30 years, it's really shifted, right? There was no conversation in 1980. There was no conversation, but there is lots of conversation. But my goal with this book is, I think we have to stop talking about it. We need to start taking action. What are we actually doing to help people? So yeah, we know there's a problem, but what are the solutions? And so coming back to your question about, people on disability, one of the things that our society has really gone away from is this concept of it takes a village to raise a child. Yeah. Right. We've become very isolated in our homes and in our communities, and we don't talk to our neighbor. We may not even like our neighbor. And that's part of the problem. So we have to get back to the sense of community. I mean, I love that story that you shared, that people were, because it doesn't, this concept of happiness is not outside of you. You cannot wait for happiness to land on you. Happiness is an inside job. And I would argue it's a choice that we make. Yeah. And that also is controversial, that statement, because if you had, you would never have caught me saying that or believing that in the decade of the 90s when I was riddled with depression and paralyzed by anxiety. You made this suggestion that I had the power to change my thought process. I would have rolled my eyes at you and walked out of the room because I was so deeply stuck in these negative thoughts that I felt like when you told me that you were saying that it was my fault. Yep. Yeah. Right. But now that I'm on the other side of that, I can see how that's faulty thinking on my part. And it's been a lot of work for me. And this is an important piece of the work that I do with my patients is I teach them how to manage their mind so they're not at the mercy of it. And that is what people are not being taught. They're just being given medication, sent out the door. Perhaps they're told to exercise. Perhaps they're told to, hang out with a friend. But even that is difficult to tell somebody when they're depressed. I mean, asking a depressed person to call a friend is like asking a deaf person to see, to hear, or a blind person to see. Yeah. It's not going to happen. You're physically paralyzed to make that phone call. So this is where the support is really important. The friends and family have to be able to identify when somebody is in depression and be able to reach out to them, not the other way around. So it's just, there's so many angles to it. And this framework that I was referring to, it's called the 7 R's of working with problematic thoughts. So we want to be able to recognize that this is the first thing you have to ask yourself. What am I actually thinking in this moment? What are the thoughts? What's the dialogue? What's the conversation that's going on in my head? Because we all have a conversation that's going on. We all have a voice in our head that keeps talking and talking and talking.
There's the story playing out. Yep.
Yeah, and we're completely identified with it, and we don't even know that we're having the conversation. So, and the other key thing about that is that I say to patients is, if the conversation you're having with yourself, so a lot of us have an inner critic. If that conversation that your inner critic, that you're having with your inner critic is something that you would never say out loud to your best friend or to your daughter or your son or your husband or wife, then why is it acceptable for you to talk to yourself that way?
Oh, wow. That's a powerful statement. Wow.
But we do it all day long.
Yeah,
beating ourselves up in our heads all day long. Oh, that was, I'm so stupid, or I don't look very good, or anyway, just start paying attention to that. But yes, we need to, and this speaks to another form of therapy that I have training in, which is called compassion focused therapy. So we need to develop some more compassion for ourselves, because here's the deal. You're going to be with you longer than anybody's going to be with you. So you're walking this planet with you all the way through. So you need that relationship to be right with yourself first. But what do? Instead, we look for somebody else to complete us, and we get married, we have kids, and we get them to fulfill us, and we get them to complete us. But that's not how it works. Now I'm really going to date myself. Did you ever see the movie Jerry Maguire?
I have seen that.
So there's a line in that movie, right, where one of the characters, and I don't remember if it was Renee Zellweger or Tom Cruise, but one of them says, "You complete me." And everybody goes, "Oh, that's so lovely," right? That's just a bunch of crap. Sorry, Hollywood, but it's stuff like that, right? We want somebody to complete us, but the reality is you have to complete you, right? And I know it sounds selfish, but people need to understand that selfish isn't a bad word. This is about self-care.
Yeah. You're speaking to the choir with all of that. I mean, I've been such a big proponent in trying to push self-care and that it's not selfish. And that exploration, I think I've talked with numerous people on the show, and I will always go there, is this, different ways of exploring the self and getting to know that person. What is the story I'm telling myself right now? What is, and then going to the next level, like, now that I've recognized it, can I understand what's at the root of it? Is there potentially something more? And that's the scary stuff, right? When you start then that's even, to me, that's even still like a foundational layer, but when you start digging into those layers, that's when the really scary stuff can come up. But we need to support each other through that work. And by doing that, we're going to get to know ourselves better and be willing to pause and sit with ourselves, because you're right. We can't go looking for it in the external world, whether it's in another person or in a material good. But, so the next level is really, after recognizing those stories is really being curious as to what's at the root of that, those beliefs and those stories that we're telling ourselves, and going back into childhood or to other experiences. And that's the deep, challenging work. That's the stuff that's you're going to be, that's going to bring up just so much hurt. It can potentially be incredibly scary, but we need to do it. And I think as clinicians, as practitioners, we can support people through that process, because at the end of that, and not that there's ever an end of that process, but empowering people to explore themselves and to uncover those roots, you'll eventually get to someone who feels empowered and feels engaged and has more meaning in their life had they not gone through that process. So we need more people like yourself doing that, to me, which is doing that deep work, which to me is just so profound and so needed in this age where it's really easy to get lost in the superficial, or to stay on the couch and listen to that story that's playing out. So,
well, and I think for a lot of people, they feel that they don't want to look back. They don't want to dig up the wound. And what I really want to emphasize here is that this is not about staying in the story, but it's about being able to move in the present moment with a different conversation than you've had. And so I know that a lot of people can get stuck in this belief that they don't want to do this investigative work because they don't want to, because it's not really about the story that you've created. It's about the beliefs that you've adopted as a result of what happened to you.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's the key point. What have you made that experience mean? So just using me with adoption as an example, I made that mean that I wasn't wanted, wasn't good enough, wasn't lovable, wasn't worthy. And somebody else who experienced sexual abuse, perhaps, could have developed the same set of core beliefs.
Exactly.
like it could, not that we're leading everyone down the same, but there's somewhat of a common pathway of you can end up in the same belief, but had drastically different experiences or inputs.
Yeah.
So it's not so much about the story, so-and-so did this to me. It's about what you've made it mean for you as an individual. And then what layers have you put on top of this armor? So we talked about that word armor. How have you armored yourself to then go through the world? So another type of training that I have in psychotherapy is Gestalt psychotherapy. And this is really interesting. They do what's called body armor. They actually look at the body and the armor, the way that it's really interesting. I'm not really paying it really good justice with the way I'm trying to explain it at the moment, but it's just, we develop armor in the way we hold our bodies even. So if you look at yourself, and this is when you're looking at your physical body completely naked, standing in the mirror, you would see the armor perhaps if you're trained to be able to interpret that. So it's really powerful to be this concept. And so you develop these layers to protect yourself. And then we go through the world and then we wonder why we have 5 divorces, and we wonder why we can't lose the weight, and we wonder why. And this is why.
Your trainings, your experiences, I definitely have to have you back to talk about more in depth some of these different, psychotherapeutic approaches. It's, the time has just flown by, and I know you need to go off to do your wonderful work with patients. So I would love to have you back in another conversation to maybe dig into some of those therapies. But at least in these last few minutes, I want to give you the opportunity to share with folks. We've talked a little bit about your practice and your book, but perhaps just take this time to share with people exactly some of the details about your work, the book, and how they can connect and reach out to you.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So I have a few ways that people can reach out to me. There's I've work with me. I am very busy in clinical practice, but I have developed a 10-week course that is available for people, which is based on the book Beyond the Label, but goes into a little bit more detail than I do in the book about some of these concepts that we're talking about looking at the concept of willpower, and looking at the concept of these shadow beliefs and unconscious commitments, and how to develop your intuition and self-love. So I do have that course, and that's available through my website, which is Christina, and my last name, Bjorndal.com. And then, of course, there is a retreat that I will be offering that goes again a little bit even deeper into these ideas. It's really important work, and if you're wanting a place to start, the Beyond the Label is a great resource. Then there's another book I wrote as well called The Essential Diet: Eating for Mental Health, and that I broke out of. It is included in Beyond the Label, but I broke it out as a separate book and added a little bit to it because most people don't know where to start. Yeah. And most people don't like being told what not to do. So I found for myself, and I find a lot of clinicians do this, we say to patients, okay, don't eat this, don't eat that, don't do blah, 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 blah. And people they're stuck in their resistance. They're stuck in, well, why do I have to give up sugar, for example? So I instead created the Essential Diet, and it's a roadmap for you. So I don't even say what not to eat. I just say instead, eat this. Right? Yeah. Follow this. This is your guide. This is your roadmap. Gives you the menu plan, blah, blah, the 2-week dietary, and it gives you the dietary analysis, the grocery list. I mean, it's basically, I'm doing everything for you except for coming to your house and buying the groceries and cooking the food for you. It's a really great guide. So that's a simple tool that either if you're a clinician listening, you could carry that in your clinic, or if you're an individual or a patient who just wants to start simple, then that's where I would start. And I think the key as well that I want to mention to people is you simply just have to start. When I work with patients, and it can be overwhelming, I get it. Believe me, I've walked this path. I get how daunting it can be. But you know what? You've got nothing to lose. And this is the same thing what Dr. Hoffer said to me. He said, you know what, Chris, are you okay with looking younger and feeling better and having no negative side effects? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And it's true, right? I do look younger, and I do, and that's what this approach will offer you. But the key is you got to take one step for yourself. So start where it seems possible for you, and do what works for you, what you think you can do for you. And I think it's key to work with somebody, whether it's I'm always for people working locally, again, because there's something about the physical relationship, right? So, but I'm available through the course if that's an option for people. But I'm really encouraged people to find a clinician or a therapist or a counselor or a coach, a medical doctor, functional medicine doctor, naturopathic doctor, chiropractor, somebody that massage therapist. I mean, pick somebody that can start you on this path, because it's hard to do it by yourself. I didn't get here by myself, right?
And to think, if anyone, we hear those stories of building yourself up from your bootstraps and coming with nothing. And the reality is somebody helped you, no matter how individual you feel, like somebody helped you in the community. So I'm so grateful that you have that. I share the same perspective of, start local and find someone in your community that you can partner with. And I'm so glad that you have so many layers of and just facets of ways that people can connect with you. I think a great way to sort of articulate is, you have the books, different resources, even the course, or working with you, individually if they're in that area. I think that's great that you have these different layers of connection and ability to interface with folks, because you're doing such tremendous work. Like I said before, really just inspired by your story and what you're doing. It's really, I don't know, for someone like myself who's gone through very similar, types of experiences and with mental illness and needing just a tribe to sit around and discovering that. I think it's great that you're willing to share that story, and I'm glad that you've knocked down the door of the bipolar, no matter whatever that label means. And I'm glad you've knocked that door down and really had your authentic self out there, because you're such a asset and wonderful person for this community. Well, great. Well, go and just continue that wonderful work. I guess I know you need to go and into your clinic, and for the listeners, I think we're gonna definitely have to have you back. So
yeah, we'll set it up.
Great.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also the social media channels. I mean, I don't really want people on social media, but anyways, that's the way of the world nowadays. So you can always find me there too.
Yeah. One of the things one of my friends told me about, I think it's a maybe better way of seeing social media is, rather than using it to connect, is using it to maintain meaningful connections. I think we get lost when we're use it to kind of create superficial connections, or we don't realize they're superficial. But it's it's a great tool to kind of maintain meaningful connections, or it can be. But I'm right there with you. It's a love-hate.
Right. It's another thing to manage in your life. It's just another thing to manage. But you're right. It does. I mean, I'm grateful for reconnecting with, lost friends from, you as your lives get busy and you move on, and it's been nice for that, for sure. But you got to be careful.
Yeah, it takes intention and purpose. So
that's right. Exactly.
Well, have a wonderful day, and thanks again for sharing this talk.
Great. You two take care. Really good to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Talk to you later.
Thank you for your presence and willingness to receive a new narrative, a passionate perspective, and perhaps a deeper sense of connection with our collective purpose. Please share this podcast with any and all that you believe will benefit from its intention to relieve one's doing and engage one's being. Please share your comments about the conversation on our podcast page and leave a review in iTunes so that the voices in this space can spread to all ears ready to receive it. Music credit goes to Dillingham for their song Vessel. Remain open, stay curious, and forever be love.
You walked on fire, and I know you tried.